Hey gang, Ted Gravlin with today's TEDcast, and today I wanted to talk about like what I'm going to call my 30-second benchmarks. And what I mean by that, I talk to a lot of contractors, and usually I'm trying to get a sense of how their business is doing and where they're at in the journey from from starting out to growing their business, and how stable are they and how financially successful they are or are not. So I have a few questions that I typically ask when I'm talking to someone, and it just gives me a sense from the answers to these of how well someone is doing. And you can actually use these questions to figure out how well you think you're doing. So, and not just well, but it could be how badly you're doing, or just do you need help in a certain area, or where that's going to be. Because it helps me to know what should we be talking about to help someone that has called me to say, can you help me? Can you help my business? So if you, just before we do that though, go ahead, if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe and hit the bell button for that. If you're on Facebook, go ahead and hit like and make comments, and that helps too. And if you're not on YouTube, go ahead and find my channel. There's a lot of videos like this on YouTube. I say that all the time, but I gotta say it for housekeeping purposes, just otherwise it doesn't do very well later on. So, first question. What I ask is, what's your annual revenue? And how many employees do you have working there? So let's just say that the guy's got 5 employees working there, and the annual revenue is $650,000. So what you want to do is you divide the annual revenue by the number of employees. So my benchmark is, if you are less than $200,000 per employee, and all the employees count, the office staff counts, if your spouse is doing your books, that counts, you count, your helpers count, they all count. Okay, so the number of employees all count. So if you're less than $200,000 per employee, you're kind of struggling. And it leads me to, now that doesn't always mean true, but 99% of the time it means there's some improvement there. How would you fix that number though? It's probably a combination of your pricing isn't right, or your selling process isn't closing enough sales. Some combination of the two. So you may be priced really right, but you can't figure out how to close them, or you might be just completely priced too cheap or something like that. I don't know what that'll be, but it tells me where to go look. Take the annual revenue and the number of employees, divide it, and it should be 200,000 and below is difficulty, and 200,000 and above is starting to look better. Now, I use annual because you can use it monthly also. If you want to do monthly, you want to go to like 12,000 per employee, 12 to actually 15,000 per employee. The problem with monthly is that, like, here we are in the summer when I'm recording this, and if I say, what was your revenue last month, and someone says a really big number, and then they have less than half of that in February, then it says they're struggling like crazy in certain parts of the year, and they just had a really great month, so it looks really great. So I want to kind of get a big overview. So I always ask annual, because it kind of smooths out the ups and downs of a year for me. Okay, so again, if you're having a struggle, if you're above or below that 200,000 number, then dude, we need to talk, because there's some things you can do really quickly that I can help you with that would say, get your closing ratio up, get your sales process up, get your numbers in place, something like that. Fix that stuff real quick. Okay. The next question is, what's your hourly rate? And that assume time and material, except that obviously even flat rate has an hourly rate to it, because when you set up your flat rate, whoever the flat rate company is, or however you did that, there's usually an hourly rate attached to it that says we're going to bill it as if it was X. What's the hourly rate? And that tells me a lot about where someone's at in their numbers. I got guys out there that are still charging, they're still charging like 85, 90 bucks an hour, $65 an hour. I heard one like that a couple weeks ago. It's like, oh my God, how in the heck are you running a business at that price, at that kind of rate, right? So my next question, which ties into this, is how did you determine that hourly rate was your number? How'd you figure that out? The answer to that question tells me a lot about whether someone has thought about their business on a business basis, or are they just kind of throwing shotguns at the wall or copycatting other folks. Because I'll get answers like, well, it was this and I raised it to that recently because I thought that wasn't enough anymore. And I'll get things like, well, that's what somebody else around here used to charge. That's what my old company used to charge before I left and started my own. So they were at this price, so I thought I would be just a little bit less than their price or something. So there's usually some reason that's not really mathematical or valid for a company that's struggling. When I get an answer that says, hey, I figured out my cost, I figured out all my things like that, and I came up with my rate, that's a better answer. So, which leads to the next question. What's your cost per billable hour to do business? That would be for your most experienced tech to send him, your highest paid tech, to send that guy to a job site and bill a customer and that. And, you know, it's rare for companies to bill 100% of their hours. You know, kind of a good rule of thumb is you're going to bill about half your hours. So in an 8-hour day, between drive time and picking up parts and doing stuff, you're probably billing 4 or 5 hours of your 8-hour day of billable. And so you got to figure out what's your hourly rate or what's your hourly cost per billable hour. What's it costing you? So basically, these two questions tie together. What's it costing you to do business, and how much are you charging your customers for you to help them? Okay, so I get this one a lot. I had a guy just recently that his cost to do business per billable hour was $104 an hour after he figured it out the way that I taught him how to do that. He was billing $85. He was charging $85 and it's costing him $104. So do you see the problem here? Now, why is this guy still in business after a while? Well, I can tell you, what happens is every once in a while there's a windfall, like he does an install for enough dollars to make up the difference or whatever. You know, he'll have something that comes in that's kind of a big, oh, there's a couple $1,000 that makes up the difference. Now realize the guy that can get away with that is not a 10-truck company or something. He's going to be smaller because by the time you've grown up there, those kinds of mistakes, they just get magnified to the point of like you're starting to make those mistakes, but they have more zeros on the end of them. You know, if you're 5 or 10,000 behind doing it that way, and you end up with an extra install or something, you can make that up. But if you're 50,000 behind or $500,000 behind, no, you're not going to make that up, and so you got to get that together. So these set of questions here is really how are you billing, how is your business set up, and more importantly, what's the mindset of the owner? How are you thinking about how to set up your business? Are you just kind of copycatting, like I just called a bunch of competitors and found out how much they're charging, just do what they're doing, or I did it like my boss used to do it, or some guy at the supply house told me to do it that way, or I saw an online forum, like you know you may be on when you're watching this, and I asked around and it seemed like that was reasonable. It's like none of that is valid. Okay, you have to understand your numbers, understand why you're setting those prices, and you have to understand your cost to do it. And then the last question is one I almost never get a really good answer to because it's an important one and it's the most difficult. And I just frankly don't even expect that someone's going to have an answer when I ask it. But I ask anyway just because I would love to be pleasantly surprised and I am from time to time pleasantly surprised to the last question. This one leads around to how are you going to be able to go to market and do marketing? So the question is, why should anyone do business with you? Now, what I mean by that is, if we dig a little deeper, when you started your business, did your town that had a few hundred air conditioning companies suddenly need one more that day? Because if you're just going to be like everybody else, there really isn't any reason for any of those customers to say, you know what, I need to call this guy. He's awesome. Unless they're your friends and neighbors or whatever and they like you. But you know, if you don't have a really good reason for anyone to do business with you, you know, as opposed to all their other options, they can call the other guys, they can decide not to do anything at all. They got a lot of other options of what they can do. So if you have a compelling reason, then you're on the way to really good business growth, and that helps in the marketing side. And it's a really important question. Now, again, when I'm working with clients, we do start answering that question, and that helps us build the marketing process we're going to build later. And we start doing that, by the way, on day one. Day one, we work on two things. We work on getting these numbers right, so you're not messing around, and then we also start working on this messaging right here because it's going to be important. Everything after that is just details of tactical deployment of those things. if you're struggling with this stuff and you need help, let me know. This is what we do for multiple companies all over the country. So again, it's annual revenue divided by number of employees, and the number that I use as my mental benchmark, even just when I'm on the phone with somebody, is, hey, if you're, how much above or below 200,000 per employee are you? And I'm going to have somebody argue with me. Well, yeah, but the office manager is a different kind of employee than the service tech that's in a truck. And yeah, I know, but it just gives a benchmark. It's just like a rule of thumb. It would be like if I were to say, I'm trying to figure out how good an NBA basketball team is, and I really don't know anything else about it. If I just ask something like, hey, what's the average height of your players? And one team says their average height is 6'9" because they got some guys over 7 feet, and some other team says it's 6'2" because that's their average height. That must mean they got some guys that are like, below 6 feet tall, right? They must have a few. And you're like, well, I don't know much about the rest of how the game is going, but my bet would be on the guys with the taller players, right? Same thing here. My bet on the company is with the higher revenue per employee. That's my bet. So again, revenue, what's the hourly rate? How did you set that rate? Okay, because the hourly rate, if it's much below, if you're below $100, game over. If you're below $200, you're probably still struggling around. And I don't know what your number needs to be, because we need to go back into how is it determined. We need to do some things. We need to figure out what's your cost per billable hour and figure that stuff out and get you set on the right path. And then, of course, why should anyone do business with you? So that's the TEDcast for today. If you'd like to get a hold of me, Facebook Messenger, tedgravlin.com/booking will take you right to a place where you can book a call. We can talk. I can ask you questions like these and more. And mostly we're going to have a conversation on those kind of calls where we're talking about what's going on for you and where are you at and how can we help. If I can help you, I will. If I can't, I'll just point you in the direction that someone who can. So that's the TEDcast, and we'll talk soon.